So Tim, we're recording. Everybody else, we're recording. So if you don't want to be in a recorded session, now's a good time to drop off. All right. So one of the ways we get to do this tonight is through Sapient Technologies. They sponsor our group. They have for the last number of years, and they also sponsored this Zoom connection tonight, which was great. So if you want to take a look at their products, they have a bunch of excellent products. You can see them all here. Each one of these have a 45-day fully functional trials. So definitely recommend jumping on their site and checking them out. Really top-notch tools. And I was talking to Max Trinidado, I think that's how you say his name. He's a Microsoft MVP. He's a PowerShell guy. He's also into the Azure aspect. He and I chatted today. He's going to be here in July, and he's going to talk about Docker containers and PowerShell and a whole bunch of different things you can run on Windows 10. So we're looking forward to July. And on that note, next month we're going to have James Brundage. He used to work on the PowerShell team. He's going to get on and he's going to talk about being flexible with your modules or with formatting. Something that he wrote, something called Easy Out. It's a product or a module he's been writing for quite a period of time. It's got some really cool pieces. He'll be up next month. So get onto the meetup.com, check out the PowerShell piece, the PowerShell group, and RSVP on that, and you can see the Zoom ID. And then I guess the other one is in June, we're going to have Don Jones get on, talk about the shell of an idea, about the history of PowerShell. Now, I don't know if you folks follow him on Twitter, but if you do, you can see he's actually been talking to Jeffrey Stover over the last number of days, and he's still getting more information. He's actually writing a book about the history of the PowerShell language. Looks pretty interesting, and it looks like a lot of fun. So that's enough of the advertisements. So I want to introduce Tim Warner. He's and let me just find him in the chat. Sorry. Okay, Tim, I'm unmuting you, I think. Nope. Okay. Tim is a Microsoft MVP. He's a Pluralsight author. He's based in Nashville, and his professional specialties include Microsoft Azure, cross-platform PowerShell, and Windows Server Platform. And you can reach him on Twitter if you want to follow him at TechTrainerTim, and same name for his website. So, Tim, are you with us?
Yes, sir. Thanks a lot, Doug.
You're welcome. Thanks for joining us tonight and doing this.
Of course.
So, I'm going to just stop sharing.
Okay.
And you can go ahead and share.
All right.
And I'll then get on and mute. I'll mute myself again, and then you're off to the races.
Sounds good. All right. Well, hopefully you're not seeing this Zoom banner up at the top. I hope you're not seeing some of this slide deck occluded. It's showing up with a Zoom banner over the top.
It looks good on our side.
Okay, good. In that case, let's proceed. Yeah, we're here to learn about PowerShell, Jupyter, and the .NET interactive environment. Because of the work I do, which is 90% writing and teaching, this struck me as a really interesting idea. Doug contacted me on Twitter one day about the possibilities inherent in this. And you may be coming to the session, maybe having known a little bit about the Jupyter project or a lot, I have no idea. But the objectives that I'm going to transmit to you over the next hour or so is making sure we're on the same page. What is the Jupyter project? What's it for? What is .NET Interactive and what is it for? And then once we figure that out and start to see some of the possibilities with PowerShell and those two technologies, I'm going to teach you how to set up an environment both on your local workstation as well as if you want to set up a server in Azure, AWS, it doesn't really matter. So that's what we've got going on. And any questions, comments, concerns, curiosities, just hit me up and just stop me right in my tracks and we'll go from there. The session materials you can find at timw.info/Jupyter. And Jupyter, there's a play on words as there is mostly with these open source technologies. PY comes from Python. The Wikipedia article is actually pretty interesting about the Jupyter project, but timw.info/Jupyter, that's just a shortcut that takes you out to one of my repos at GitHub. And in there, you're going to find the slide deck, which is really, there's nothing to it. There's just 8 slides, but I created a PDF of the slide deck And there's also a Markdown file that contains instructions and helpful tips and that kind of stuff that hopefully will prove useful to you. And I'll make sure to share this link at the end of the session as well. So kicking things off, understanding this Jupyter project. It's an outgrowth of the IPython distribution, if you're familiar with that, interactive Python. Don't need to go over the blow-by-blow history, but the bottom line with Jupyter Notebooks specifically is that you've got this interactive experience that has a runtime environment embedded in the web application. So that's compelling regardless of whether you're, say, a data scientist or a machine learning specialist or an AI specialist or just a systems administrator, for heaven's sake. You can combine live code that you store in the notebook and can run interactively with Markdown, rich text. So you've got this possibility of this various runtime environments. The main languages that you see in Jupyter Notebooks are ones that data science people use principally R and Python and Scala. But the value proposition of the .NET Interactive is that it brings the .NET Core runtime and libraries into the Python ecosystem, which, as you're going to see in the upcoming demo, means that you can run C#, F#, and PowerShell in this environment. Are you familiar with Markdown at all? That's, again, open source play on words. Markdown is a markup language that uses a relatively simple syntax that allows you to apply rich text formatting on plain text. I'm a huge fan of Markdown myself. Another thing that these Jupyter Notebooks give you that's really cool is that you can change the view to present your data to different audiences. So the data science people like this because you can show just the code to your colleagues, or you can render the code and you can do graphical renderings and this kind of stuff. You can just show your output and your documentation to your business stakeholders who don't care about all the programming under the hood. So the idea here is that you've got a collaborative environment for both programmers as well as non-programmers. There's kind of a place for everybody in these Jupyter Notebooks. It's really interesting. I myself am a Microsoft Azure specialist, and I'll include this in the upcoming demo as well. Azure has a service that's currently in public preview called Azure Notebooks, and you can just look at that as a cloud-hosted Jupyter Notebook. That's essentially what it is. There's some other Azure products that have support for Jupyter. Let me see. You've got it in the Azure Machine Learning Service. You've got it in HD Insight for Hadoop Big Data Analytics. And then in Azure Databricks, it uses a Jupyter-like product, but it's not Jupyter itself, if that makes sense. This .NET Interactive initiative, again, all open source in GitHub, had its start in the try.net platform. If you're familiar with that, it's really interesting. I remember, and you probably do as well. Let me see if I can adjust my browser a little bit here. If you go into certain at Microsoft Docs, certain places at docs.microsoft.com in the .NET Core documentation, for instance, here this is a C# tutorial. You know, you're used to seeing these code snippets that you can copy and then paste into your IDE. But notice here you've got this try this, where you can actually run the code live in the browser. This is this try.net open source initiative that Microsoft's been cooking for a while. Now, I myself am not a .NET developer, so I came across this live interactive coding environment elsewhere in the docs, in the Azure docs specifically. I think I lost the tab. Let me see if I can find it. It isn't too hard to find. Yeah, here it is. So this is in the Azure documentation. Quick start, create a Windows virtual machine in Azure with PowerShell. Once again, besides just being able to copy the code snippets, we've got this sandbox that's built right in. And Microsoft, as you know, is such a different company how it used to be before Satya. Now they're all open about everything. Of course, the .NET Interactive project is open source, but if you go into their docs and read about it, they'll tell you all of the plumbing and internals that you can geek out on that if you're interested. You with me so far? So that's where this concept came from and crossed Microsoft's radar. And I'm sure also Microsoft investing so heavily in Azure, they came across with machine learning and Databricks and Hadoop that a lot of professionals, IT professionals and data science professionals were preferring this Jupyter Notebook. So why not just give our users access to that? So as I said earlier, we can look at the .NET Interactive project as a way to bring the .NET environment, .NET Core 3 specifically, to Jupyter Notebooks. And as I said, the 3 languages that are supported now, and I'm sure this is going to broaden as we go on in time, are C#, F#, and PowerShell. I don't know if there's any service level agreement or official support. You'll have to dive into the docs and the product, the .NET Core team's blog to learn detail. They call it they don't even necessarily call it a preview feature. Yeah, I think it's in public preview, they would call it. And at least the way public preview features work in Azure, the general understanding is that it's not covered with a service level agreement or in your support agreements, but there can be exceptions to that. So some use cases, again, when Doug first presented this idea to me, I thought, wow, this idea of running PowerShell interactively in a Jupyter notebook, I was all set to use this at the PowerShell Summit in Redmond if it wasn't for this COVID thing. I was hoping to present our on-ramp program to PowerShell newcomers by using Jupyter Notebooks and .NET Interactive. And you'll see why once we get rolling with it. It's a great teaching and learning environment. And the name of this presentation, Skill Up on PowerShell, because you probably know some of your teammates may still be resistant to taking the plunge to become proficient in PowerShell. Maybe they don't, like me, I mean, I don't read physical books anymore. I do everything on an e-reader or on a screen of some type. And the idea of having a book folded over, trying to copy code, I don't know, whatever the resistance might be. This idea seems pretty compelling because it brings those code snippets to life. You can run them and edit them and rerun them interactively alongside that Markdown documentation. Some other possible use cases for this would be your internal team's documentation. Maybe you're building your own PowerShell modules, etc., and you want to document those in a more interactive way. Maybe your support team can use the Jupyter Notebook paradigm to apply quick fixes in terms of support knowledge base. There's a lot here that I think you can dive into behind or beyond what this was traditionally for, which, as I said several times, is the data science industry. Okay, so let's end the slideshow for now and let's get into the demo. In the files that I created for you, that timw.info/Jupyter, there's that Markdown file. I just want to walk you through that, some of the goodies in there. Specifically, you've got some recipes that you may be interested in. Specifically, how can you get this environment up and running on your workstation? Now, I did this tutorial in Windows 10. It's essentially the same for Mac OS or Linux. Because as you know, .NET Core is cross-platform, Python is cross-platform, so it's all good. Jupyter is cross-platform, but here it is. Step 1 is you want to make sure to install the .NET Core software development kit. I've got a handy link there. A couple clicks, next, finish. Next, you'll want to, or an easy, probably the most straightforward way to do this is to install Anaconda. Anaconda is a special distribution of Python 3. And it's built that includes a bunch of extra tools that are of use to data scientists. And it actually includes the Jupyter environment with it. So again, next, finish. In less than 10 seconds, you've got that down. And Anaconda has its own console. And the next 2 steps here, you could do the first one in a PowerShell console using the .NET CLI that's part of the .NET Core. .NET tool install, global Microsoft.NET-interactive, just one line, and then switch over to the Anaconda console and do .NET Interactive Jupyter install. That will install the .NET kernel into your Jupyter environment. Okay, so it's not too tough. And to think about standing up a Jupyter server in the cloud, it's literally, if you can perform these tasks on that server, you can stand up a Jupyter.NET Interactive environment wherever you are. A little bit later in this demo, I'll give you an example in Azure that I think might be helpful, but yeah, that's really it. And then just for some value add, I give you a little bit of help in terms of starting the Jupyter Notebook service, starting the server, I should say. Just from a command prompt, you just do Jupyter. And you know, it's the traditional syntax with Linux, Unix tools, # help to get the help screen. To start a new notebook, you can just do Jupyter Notebook. But one thing that Anaconda gives you in addition, let me try to get some of these windows out of the way. Actually, I have it running down on my taskbar, is that they give you an icon that starts the Jupyter Notebook for you. It's just there as a convenience. That's all it is. Okay. Questions, comments so far? Let me take this pause to say, I hope you and all your loved ones are doing okay in New York City. I'm a native New Yorker myself. My wife and I are from Syracuse, actually, so we're upstate. Now we've been in Nashville, Tennessee for the last 20 years, but I think of you daily in the city. Another thing that I'll, yes,
sorry.
sir.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, I hope everybody's doing well down there. It's pretty crazy times up here. I was wondering if you might show something about the My Binder at all tonight?
Yes, I will.
Okay, cool.
The Binder project is a way to essentially package and share entire Jupyter environments. In fact, right below this bit on Jupyter Lab, I've got a couple important links. Actually, let me just explain these links, because this is kind of your homework assignment if you want to get started with this and start to deep dive after this session. This first link here comes from one of the blog posts that the .NET team put up. This is where you'll want to go right now if you want to. It's a live Binder environment that has Jupyter and .NET Interactive and everything all preloaded, and it even goes beyond that. Let's just jump over there and kick the tires, because it'll also give us a chance to look at Jupyter Notebooks if you haven't looked at those before. This toolbar is driving me nuts. Let me see if I can hide it. Hide floating meeting controls. Relief. Okay, so this is what it looks like if you click that link in that Markdown file. It takes you out to this site, Binder, which again is a way to package and share entire Jupyter environments, all of your books and your environments and everything. It times out really quickly, so I'm going to have to click that link again, unfortunately. So let me come back to Markdown, launch .NET Interactive with Binder. Take a moment. Have you noticed, for those of you who work in Azure, it's been quite a bit slower than usual, hasn't it? And same thing with Binder. All of these SaaS companies and cloud vendors are getting so much extra utilization now, aren't they? And just as an aside, while we're waiting for this to load up, if you're interested in the Azure certifications at all, if you want to take advantage of any downtime for that, might be a good time for you to do that, because Microsoft appears to have turned off all of the performance-based labs that they normally put in the exams, where in the exam you connect to a virtual machine and you're actually required to perform tasks. It's kind of a bad thing from a demonstrating your skills standpoint, but it's a good thing if you don't want to be bothered with it, because there's always the fear that the environment will crash. Now, that .NET Interactive page that I clicked out to actually brought us out to not a Jupyter Notebook as such, but an extension. We could look at it as the next generation of the Jupyter Notebook, called Jupyter Lab. And some of the reasons why Jupyter Lab, I think, might be preferable to you as opposed to just a straight Jupyter Notebook is that it's got this directory viewer and native support for source code control like Git, which is part of our lives, isn't it, nowadays? So let me see, what else do I want you to see? Over here in this launcher, this is where we can choose what's called the kernel, or the underlying runtime environment. And notice that just like Azure Active Directory is a multi-tenant identity store, Jupyter and Jupyter Lab, it's a multi-kernel environment as well. So we can start a blank notebook using Python, C#, F#, or PowerShell. Just open a console, and then there's some additional options that the Microsoft people put in just for grins. Python notebooks have the extension IPYNB. Say that 3 times quickly. And the extra value add that the .NET team added to this demo environment are these folders, where they give you copious examples to work through. That's why I said this is a good homework assignment for you. They've got multi-language, polyglot, F#, C#, and we want to go into PowerShell. And they've got a docs and a samples folder, and they've got a managing Azure notebook that I'll open right now. So if you're familiar at all with Markdown, I'm sure you're familiar with the rich text capabilities. So you can create, whether you're doing documentation or reports or research, you can make really nice looking documents here. And of course you can print them, but you can also download these notebooks or export them as a number of different formats. You can export to PDF, you can just keep it in Markdown, you can do HTML. Again, the idea with these is collaboration, cross-platform fidelity, and is there a third one? Well,
I think also what I like about it also too, Tim, I don't know if you touched on it, is that this is also a no install way to go with, just trying to test this out. You can do it without installing anything on your machine, just up and running.
Yes, exactly. The MyBinder ecosystem is where the .NET team and community members can publish their notebooks. And like I said, the link for this particular sample notebook is in the bottom of that Markdown file that I included in the session files. It's down right at the bottom. I talk a little bit about installing Jupyter Lab. You can install Jupyter Lab on your own system with just one line of code. Conda is the package management tool that's used with Anaconda environment. And then under there, as I keep saying, launch.NET Interactive with Binder, it brings us here. Now, what are some things just as terms of a quick familiarity with using these notebooks? Well, we're looking at a notebook that somebody's already created, but if we're creating our own notebook, there's the concept of cells. You can look at this as a document, and it consists of a vertical row of cells, and we can add additional, this is read only of course, because this is a demo environment, but in a moment I'll switch to a local Jupyter notebook that I have where we can actually make changes. But you can insert cells, you can move them around, whatever you need to do. And see this drop down here, you can change whether a cell is going to be for source code or Markdown. In this case, it looks like this cell is going to install some of the AZ modules. Now, there's controls here for running those cells. As you can see on the run menu, you can just run the whole dadgum book and just let it run. Or if you're just taking a stepwise approach, you can run cells individually by using the toolbar control, or the most common shortcut is Shift-Enter. Notice that when I did Shift-Enter, it brought the focus down to the next cell, and you can see a little asterisk because it's thinking. Also in the kernel over here, when the kernel's busy, it shows in a different color, and then any output shows up down below. If you read up in the .NET Interactive documentation, they tell you where they are. There's some stuff with PowerShell that's not yet implemented. There's a lot that is. You'd have to check the documentation and their blog, the .NET Core blog, to get all the specific information, okay? So again, we've got the Markdown headings, the block quote text, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is the general theme, okay? Questions, comments, concerns before we go to our own Jupyter notebook? All right. Let me clear out some of these tabs so my eyes stop crossing.
Hey, Tim. We had one question in the chat.
Great.
Let me see. So from Jason, he said, you stated a use case of making your own support KB source. Would that be stored local or on a Jupyter server or cloud, etc.? Yeah.
Well, if you want it to be interactive, then the document would have to be on a machine. It doesn't even have to be a server operating system, but it would have to be a machine that's running the Jupyter service, the Jupyter server. Because, I mean, this is a rendered web application. So, yeah, so I guess if this, in your support documentation, perhaps you would click out to a Jupyter notebook that's on a Jupyter server, or you could install Jupyter on that machine. Ideas. All right, I've got a local Jupyter service running here. Let me see if I can find it. Here we go. I just created a new blank notebook. So we can go to File, New Notebook. And because I've got .NET Interactive here, I can choose PowerShell as my engine. And you can change the kernel as you go on here. There's a kernel menu in Jupyter where you can, if the kernel hangs and is giving you some kind of problem, you can do a restart operation, etc., etc. And then there's a change kernel if you need to over here. As I was saying a moment ago, when you're running one or more cells, the asterisk tells you what's working on currently, and this little clear circle fills in when the kernel's busy. I find that's useful as an indicator, especially for longer running cells. It's hard to know if Jupyter's actually doing something or if it's stuck, you know what I mean? So at this case, we can just try whatever you want to try. Like what I had done in that other tab was just a PS version table. And I found that the tab completion does work. It's a little bit laggy, but it drops down just like you would expect the autocomplete help elsewhere. And then anybody remember the key combination to run a specific cell? Shift Enter. Yeah. And again, we can go to Cell and add cells below, or actually it's Insert. Insert cell above, insert cell below. It's defaulting to a code cell, but if we wanted to do Markdown, actually we'd probably want to keep it here. Let me try this. This is a heading 2 heading, and then bullet 1, bullet 2, etc. You know, number 1, number 2. I guess you could do a static code fence kind of thing, but kind of defeats the point of having live code in your book. Let me see, if we convert this to Markdown, let's see, code. You can just switch back and forth here. I'm a bit clumsy, as you can obviously tell, but I hope you're getting the general idea.
I think if you hit Shift Enter on that, it might actually take.
Thank you, Doug. The voice of experience speaks. Thank you. Shift Enter, and there's the rendered text. And as I was saying, you can come into the text that's been rendered and shift it back to code if you need to work on the underlying Markdown. There. Okay. Shift Enter. All right, let's see here. Okay, so that's Jupyter, PowerShell. All right, my gosh, this is going a heck of a lot faster than I thought. In terms of cloud-based Jupyter servers and the relationship of Jupyter to Azure Notebooks, I said at the beginning of this session that Microsoft does have an Azure-hosted notebook service. It's in public preview. It's notebooks.azure.com. The good news is that it's free and that it's in preview and it's all well and good. The bad news is that it's not yet working with .NET Interactive, at least not natively. So you create what's called a project here. And let's see, where's the new command? I'm kind of clumsy in here as well. But in terms of the underlying server that's giving you the compute when you use Azure Notebooks, you can either just use the Azure Compute, just the free tier, or you can do what's called direct compute. So I wanted to go a little bit further with that. So the idea is you want to do everything in the cloud. You want to use Azure Notebooks. Eventually, I can only assume that the PowerShell and .NET Core environment will be surfaced in here. And so the question is, what benefit could possibly you get by using this direct compute target? Well, I'm leading up to something. Let me quickly show you what I'm talking about. Perhaps what I'm about to show is mostly of interest if you're a data scientist, but even if not, there's a certain virtual machine template in the marketplace called the Azure Data Science Virtual Machine. And it can save, again, just in the interest of saving time, You can download or just deploy rather a virtual machine that already has Anaconda, already has Jupyter. It doesn't have .NET Interactive on it yet, but it's got you just about all of the way there. And so if we look in the Azure Marketplace for data science, we're going to see, I don't know what the difference between Gen 1 and Gen 2 is here actually, but they've got Ubuntu, Linux, and Windows Server. And these, as I said, are pre-configured virtual machines that have all of these tools already pre-installed. So you can just spin up the VM and go. In fact, I've got it right here. I've created one before we started. So let me just pop in there really quickly. Let's see here. See if I can remember my password. Okay. Yeah, so I've already got some stuff up here. Let me get this out of the way. Yeah, so when you log into the data science virtual machine, you see a whole bunch of icons here on the desktop. But like I said, the Jupyter server is already here. The Anaconda Python distribution is already there. .NET Core, the .NET command, and the .NET libraries are all there. Pretty much the only thing you would need to do is install .NET Interactive and you're off and running, okay? So here I've started the Jupyter server service, and they have a whole bunch of sample notebooks on the data science virtual machine. As you can see, they're skewed very heavily toward machine learning. But again, it's just a place to go in, kick the tires, etc. And this is using the V1 or the native Jupyter notebook as opposed to the Jupyter Lab. Okay, so how does this data science virtual machine, what does this possibly have to do with Azure Notebooks? Well, you can combine them. That is, you can use the data science virtual machine as a back end to the Azure Notebook service. So you can kind of, if you wanted to, get double duty. So if I come back to my Azure Notebook service, I'm just going to need the IP address of that virtual machine, and I'd need to authenticate to it. It needs to be a machine in Azure, a virtual machine in Azure that's running the Jupyter server. And it's just a way to connect those services. It's just as simple as that. Doug, can you give some use cases in your industry?
Yeah, well, basically, I'm in the finance world, but all the data scientist folks use this. We also use it, for example, we collect tons of telemetry data for lots of different applications in the bank. And we capture it into things, we use Python mostly, and we capture it into Parquet files and whatnot. And then we use Python to actually interact with that. And then within the Jupyter Notebooks and within Python, there's things like Plotly, and there's all kinds of other statistical and like NumPy and SciPy that we use to do analysis of the data. And then we can actually use other things that actually do plotting of the data. I don't know if that helps. Does that make sense?
That Markdown again and go back to the .NET Interactive Sandbox, because one of the samples in there, they show an example of doing a visualization using a PowerShell module. I think it's called, I think you mentioned it actually, Doug, Plot something or other.
It's called Plotly. It's a open source project that's done not by Microsoft. They plumbed it into the PowerShell space. I think it's in a second. I'm not sure if it's there. Yeah. Samples. Oh no, there you go.
Plotting with XPlot.
They named it. They put X in front of it for some reason. It may change. Yeah, this is it. Cool.
Okay, so I'm gonna just do a run. Why is my VM shutting down? This is something you don't want to see. Okay, nice. All right, well, let me.
The demo gods have spoken.
Isn't that something? It reminds me of at last year's PowerShell Summit. Joey Aiello was doing something with PowerShell and Azure, and Azure had an outage that took down the regions that he was trying to use. So he
Really?
was really stuck in the mud right out of the gate in his session. I'm going to quickly jump over and restart that virtual machine so we can get back up and running here. Boy, that was crazy.
That's funny.
Now, you might expect that to happen if you were using the spot instance option for virtual machines, but I'm not. I'm paying good money for this machine here. Server 1. It's deallocating. It figures. Okay, well, where was I going with that point? Yeah, I was just going to show you in the sample files there in that docs folder. They show you how to use that Plotly module to do visualizations in PowerShell. Because again, that's one of the typical selling points of Jupyter Notebooks, that you can, just like Doug was saying, NumPy and SciPy and all of those data science Python modules are known for being able to easily spin up visualizations. And we can do that in PowerShell as well. Gosh, yeah, this might.
Oh, Tim, yeah, Alexander's on, and he was asking, do you have auto shutdown set up?
Yes. Yeah, this is a user error problem. I'd love to be able to blame this on Microsoft, but I have this VM set to shut down. It's actually late. It's supposed to shut down at 6 p.m. Central Time. And it looks, I should have remembered that. So this was truly and honestly my bad. Thank you for keeping me honest. And Jim Burley, I see that you're here. A lot of familiar faces and names. Jason as well, a lot of you. Wow, cool. Yeah, this was my bad. So what else? While we're waiting here, I don't know. This has taken a long time to deallocate. That's something I found today as well, have you, that operations in Azure, especially around deallocating and deploying, are taking 3 or more times longer than usual.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I think there were some of the other things I've seen people, I think, do incident type reporting using these actually Azure, the Azure notebook type stuff, but which are basically Jupyter Notebooks as well. And so basically, if there's a problem on a machine, they actually, if they have Azure Data Studio installed, they'll send out an Azure Data Notebook with a bunch of things that people can click on and run and collect information, and then they save the Jupyter notebook. They save that notebook, and then they email that notebook back or save it to a server, and then people can actually review the issues.
Yeah, my understanding of the Binder project is that it literally, you can package up your whole environment. But the actual IPY or whatever that extension is, that's just effectively a JSON document. And you can share the document among servers. And as long as the Jupyter server is running and you've got the runtime or the kernel installed, you're good to go.
That's actually absolutely correct. In fact, I'll use that as a way to tout my own horn for a bit.
Please do.
So yeah, actually, SQL Variant on Twitter. Is that right, Aaron? So he was telling me about some of the Azure Data Studio stuff, and I cracked open the IPYNB file. It's all JSON, and it's a similar format as the Jupyter Notebook. They're a little bit different, but I started writing a bunch of PowerShell tools that actually help you create them on the fly. You can actually dump them. You can actually execute all the PowerShell in it as if, rather than, and I have up on my, I think I actually put it out on the PowerShell gallery called PS or just PowerShell Notebooks. And so it's an extension module that helps you interact with that JSON directly. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff. Yeah, it's a pretty simple format. The Python people did a really interesting job with it. So you can interact with it, and again, to build them, to run them, to do a lot of different things. It's a really cool ecosystem.
Do you have your PowerShell gallery link that you can put in the chat now, or do you not have it?
Yep, I'll grab that. Yep, I'll do that.
Wow, that's excellent. Well, I guess I could grab my guitar and play, but I think we've reached the end of the road here. I don't know what else to say. At the bottom of that Markdown file that I created for you, I've given you a link that takes you out to that Binder site to learn more about sharing your Python notebooks, and then just the key documentation resources that I found as I was putting together this for you, including just the user manual for Jupyter, as well as Jupyter Lab down at the very bottom. Okay, but you can get these files, again, the link for that, let me just added in a new file here, is timw.info/Jupyter, and you can snag those files at your convenience. What else would you like to know about?
Any questions out there? I guess, Josh, can you link this page again? Which page you're looking for, Josh? For his. Question is, have you attempted to use the Active Directory module in notebooks using PS7?
No, I haven't. No. That'd be an interesting one, because the Active Directory module was a little later to the game, wasn't it, with PowerShell core?
I believe so. But yeah, so all these notebooks also are run on PowerShell 7.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering if you're running a local, I don't know, thinking off the top of my head, if you ran a Jupyter Notebook instance locally, it's
Mm-hmm.
PowerShell 7, you might be able to pull in the Active Directory stuff
Mm-hmm.
by with the what's that piece that they wrote where you can actually pull in version 5 right into 7.
Mm-hmm.
So that might be doable, but don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know either.
Good question. Good question.
Mm-hmm.
So looks like that would have been cool to see the actual grass. I don't know if you saw wanted to grab one of the links. I put also in the chat to the PowerShell gallery for it, but also to the GitHub repo. I don't know if I have any good visuals on there though. But anyway, we can do that another time. Well, Tim, that was really great. Really appreciate it. Great demo. Great covering all the different aspects of Jupyter Notebook. I think this whole thing, Jupyter Labs, and with the binder capability, I think this is going to be a whole new way that we can start doing some cool things, new cool things with PowerShell.
I hope so. Again, I guess I'm biased a little bit being an instructor, but boy, is it a compelling thing rather than just static code. That seems to be where docs.microsoft.com is going over time. Interactive documentation, it's called.
Yeah, I think, I like that. I think I called, at some point I was playing around with it on Twitter, I called it executable documents.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I think it has a whole, it's very cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I don't think we have
Cool.
any other questions. Tim, thank you again. Really appreciate it, especially during a crazy time to be able to get on and give us some really good deep dive on this.
Very glad to be here. Thanks, Doug, and thanks for having me, everybody. Take good care.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. Talk to you later. See you next month.